Good morning, delegates. It's a privilege to join such a talented group of students, future leaders from across the world. You've each come here not just to represent nations, but to engage in the kind of conversations that will shape the ideas and decisions of tomorrow. I'm Sue Kim, and over the past, I will not say however many years, I've worked in the field of intelligence and national security at the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Defense, Rand Corporation, and American University. And occasionally, I find myself on networks like CNN, BBC, Bloomberg, talking about geopolitics, security, decision making, the very topics you'll like to discuss at this week's conference. But I'll tell you something that I've learned that doesn't usually make it into the headlines. The moments that actually matter the most aren't the ones where you have all the answers or where you're the loudest person in the room. In fact, they're often the moments when you feel most uncertain. When you notice something others don't, when you take a risk to speak up, or act in a way that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Those moments, the small, imperfect, sometimes awkward ones, can ripple far beyond what you can see. So, I want to start with one of those moments. It's a story from early in my career that taught me how a single question, even one that felt insignificant at the time, can change everything. Because life and leadership often happens when you least expect it. I walked into a briefing where everyone else seemed super serious, super confident, prepared, and really sure of what they were saying. And I wasn't. I was the youngest person in the room and one of several females, so naturally I felt small, invisible, and a little bit out of place. Imposter syndrome much? But as the discussion went on, I noticed something in the room that didn't quite add up. So, of course, I hesitated. I read the document over and over and over again, trying to make sure I read it correctly. I worried maybe it was a silly observation and that I had misunderstood. But finally, I asked a question. Just one question. And suddenly, everyone paused. You could almost feel the air shift. People started looking back at the data, rereading their notes, rethinking their assumptions. And a couple of the more senior folks in the room glanced at me a few times. You know, like the way that they look behind from your glasses, right? Yeah, that look. So, of course, I totally felt like I screwed up big time. But you know what happened? That question ended up stirring a conversation about an elephant in the room that needed to be hashed out. The conversation didn't just move forward, it actually pivoted. Not because I had the right answer, but because that small question disrupted what everyone thought they already knew. And looking back, I realized something. Leadership isn't always about having the loudest voice, the bulletproof answer, or that crowned fancy title. Sometimes it's about noticing what others don't, having the curiosity and the courage to speak up, and trusting that even small actions ripple far beyond what you can see. Oh, and here's a twist. So later that day, I realized I'd actually misread part of the report. So I was wrong on a few details, right? But that mistake, that's what started the discussion that ultimately got us to the right conclusion. So yeah, my error caused the ripple, fortuitously, of course. It's not flashy, it's not cinematic, but it's true. Sometimes your missteps, your awkward questions, or the moments of self-doubt are exactly what spark change. That experience taught me what awareness really means. We often think about power as something visible, right? The titles, platforms, influence, money. But power, in its most formative sense, often starts quietly. It begins in awareness, the ability to see what others miss. When you walk into a room and pick up on what's not being said, when you notice who's being talked over, who's being dismissed, and who actually holds real weight. When you realize that something everyone accepts as normal maybe shouldn't be. That's awareness, and it's more powerful than you think. Because your curiosity doesn't just transform how you see things, it shapes how others start to see them too. Asking a thoughtful question can shift perspective, open minds, and even redirect the course of discussion. And that's why I think of curiosity as a form of power. Not the loud performative kind, but the kind that changes how people think. Don't be afraid to ask the question that unsettles assumptions or reveals what's overlooked. That's actually how transformation begins, ripple by ripple, together. Each of you has a unique lens, shaped by your background, your memories, your strengths, and your story. And sometimes we're taught to downplay that lens, to fit in, to think like everyone else. But here's the paradox. The very perspective that makes you feel different is often the one that can make a difference. So think of it as like your compass, right? The quiet internal guide that tells you when something doesn't sit right or when something is actually worth fighting for. When I was starting out, I often saw dynamics others ignored or asked questions that just like didn't fit the usual script. And over time, that became my edge. Because in every room, the person who can see what others can't is often the one who can move the room forward. And that impact might not be immediate. You may not see it in that meeting or in that moment, but people notice. They remember. Awareness leaves an imprint, and often it plants a seed that grows later. But seeing differently is only half the story, guys. The other half is acting together. Ideas ripple farther when they meet other ripples, when awareness meets collaboration. When you listen, acknowledge differences, and build on each other's insights, that's when transformation stops being in the abstract and starts to take shape. So if awareness is the seed, then collaboration is the soil it grows in. Power doesn't move in straight lines. It flows through relationships, communities, and the unwritten norms that shape decisions long before they're made. Sometimes influence looks like a headline or a podium speech, but more often, it's actually quieter. It's the work of connecting people who might not otherwise meet, bridging gaps, asking the right questions at the right time. The most effective leaders understand this. They combine awareness with connection. They notice patterns, but they also invite perspectives they don't yet understand. And that doesn't always mean a formal meeting or a conference. Influence often happens in small, genuine moments, conversation, coffee chat, a curious exchange where your ideas mix and evolve. That is how awareness meets collaboration. That's where ripples intersect and where waves of change actually start to begin. So, what can you take away with you from this conference? Three things. First, ask bold questions. Curiosity is how ideas start. It's how breakthroughs happen. The best questions don't just fill silence or seek attention, they shift perspective. They make people stop and think, wait, why are we doing this way? You don't need all the answers. You just need to have the courage to ask the questions that move the conversation forward. So, whether you're in a classroom, a club, or a negotiation room like this one, your question might be that spark that changes how others think. Second, take small, thoughtful actions. Big change rarely starts big, guys. It begins with something small. Decision to speak up, to volunteer, to take initiative when no one asked you to. Every major shift from innovations like Facebook, SpaceX, to movements like climate action and social injustice started with somebody noticing a gap and deciding to act on it. Most ideas begin as experiments, even mistakes, but they only become transformative because someone tried. And third, collaborate across differences. The future won't be built by people who think alike. It'll be built by people who think together. So listen to those who see the world differently from you. Not to agree on everything, but to understand where they're coming from. That's how you'll find better answers and more creative solutions. Transformation is never a solo journey. It's the product of shared awareness, shared courage, and shared purpose. And in this room, with over 500 of you representing nearly every corner of the world, you're already practicing what it means to transform tomorrow together. Every question you ask, every small action you take, every connection you make will make intersects with other ripples. And together, those ripples create waves that can change the world. Your voice matters, your perspective matters, your curiosity matters. And when you combine awareness with courage and collaboration, you're not just imagining a better tomorrow, you're actually creating it. So go out, make waves, and transform tomorrow together.